Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Be Sustainable. Two guests today, one returning visitor and one brand new guest for us. The brand new guest, Dr. Mary Pothitou. Mary is a real estate sustainability expert and an ESOS Lead Assessor with an Engineering Doctorate focusing on small power use and working practices in office buildings. She's worked with a range of businesses, including data centre providers, telecoms and consultancies, such as DXC Technology, Ericsson and CGI, helping them to identify energy-saving opportunities, drive sustainable practices and decarbonise their operations. That gives you some clue as to what we're talking about today. Also with us, Dr. Pippa Boyd. Pippa has been with us previously talking about circular economy and innovative building materials. She's a senior lecturer at UCM, involved in the development and delivery of our MSc in Innovation in Sustainable Built Environments, and she has a background in mechanical engineering and production methods. Before entering academia, she operated as a consultant in change management and organisational roles, and she completed her PhD in sustainable innovation and uptake. So we have two very well qualified and very experienced individuals with us today from both academic and practical backgrounds. So Mary, Pippa, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's launch straight into it. We're talking today about decarbonising, we're talking about energy and so on. So let's start off with a big question, Mary. Why is it important for office buildings to decarbonise?
I would say that it's absolutely critical and for several compelling reasons. Let me start with some numbers that still surprise me. So globally, buildings and construction are responsible for 34% of energy demand and 37% of energy and process-related CO2 emissions as of 2022. In the UK, non-domestic properties are responsible for a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions. And in the UK, I would say that a very small proportion, around 0.5% of commercial building stock has been built in the last decade, while at least 50% is 50 years old or older. So according to some industry reports, I would say at least 80% of the commercial buildings in the UK's major cities and markets need to be upgraded in order to meet the government's 2030 minimum energy efficiency standard. So I would say that these GHG emissions in buildings, they mainly come from two sources. The largest proportion, it comes from the operational carbon, which is heating, ventilation, air conditioning, lighting, and any small power devices. These only, they are responsible for 26 to 28% of global energy-related emissions. We also have the construction, of course, you understand, and the embodied carbon from the materials and the construction process itself, which adds another 11% globally. Worryingly, despite progress in the technology and increased investment on buildings, the global, I would say, energy demand for buildings has increased in recent years, mainly because the increased demand in floor space and energy demand, particularly for cooling, which actually outpacing the efficiency gains. And focusing on office buildings, I would say that they are significant energy consumers within the commercial real estate sector, because commercial buildings last for decades, and the design and operational decisions that we make today for those buildings, they lock in patterns of energy use and emissions for a very long time. So failing to decarbonize the commercial buildings mainly means that we're failing to meet our climate targets. Beyond the the environmental imperative, I would say that that's also a business case. Decarbonisation means lowering energy costs. Apart from that, is increasingly tenants and investors, they require sustainable buildings, which actually impacting rental rates and asset values, and also regulations are tightened globally, and particularly in the UK with the the minimum energy efficiency standards, which we have like the deadlines by 2030, meaning non-decarbonised buildings risk becoming stranded assets and facing costly upgrades and I would say or devaluation. So our mission here is really needs to be broader than just cutting emissions, and cutting carbon is about transforming, I would say, our office buildings from climate liabilities to climate assets.
Okay.
So we really need to create spaces that are not only efficient, but they're also healthy, comfortable, and resilient for the people who use them, while driving innovation so that at least the spaces are future ready and creating long-term, I would say, economic value.
Yeah.
So that's at least actually, I would say, while we spend so much time in offices, the flip side of it is that there is so much potential to improve buildings. And that's what we're here really to discuss, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'd be interested in a moment to start to talk about what the typical path for decarbonising a building is. But Pippa, I can see you nodding along at points there, and I'm just interested in your view on sort of the market forces around this at the moment. What's happening out there that in terms of the awareness from the non-specialist around this kind of these kind of activities?
I think that's a really interesting question. And it ties in with some research that we're doing at the moment, which is about the disconnect between the language of the facilities manager and the people involved in operational decisions about decarbonising, and also, or in parallel with decisions taken by real estate investors, people managing that portfolio, making the decisions about when to invest or disinvest, when to do retrofit. And we're finding that their languages are very different. So facilities managers understand, the need to reduce carbon, what decarbonisation might mean in terms of programs for refurbishment. But the people actually running the budgets and taking those decisions are actually more interested in what green premium can we get? How does that actually affect our portfolio? Do we have any stranded assets? So I think that there is going to be increasingly some sort of alignment between these two different voices or stakeholder groups.
Yeah, and the different perspectives and the different strategic periods that they influence. Yeah,
and that's another whole conversation.
Well, absolutely, probably a whole other episode. Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, so let's start getting into the approach a little bit. What's the typical path then, Maria, for decarbonising a building?
Well, I would say that while every building is unique, at least the process and established and typical process that I follow and organization usually follow involves a I would say, stage process and a number of steps. So the first step is we measure and we benchmark. So we actually need to understand the energy consumption, the carbon footprint of the building, and establish a baseline and benchmark against similar buildings, which may be challenging, but we can actually unpack this later on. Then you actually, the second step is to conduct an energy audit and assess and identify specific energy saving opportunities and carbon reduction measures. The third step, I would say, prioritize and plan. So you rank opportunities identified based on their cost, their saving opportunities, their carbon impact, their feasibility. And that will actually help you to develop an implementation plan. Then implementing deeper retrofit, this is where you actually undertake more significant upgrades in terms of, focusing on major energy systems in the building, such as the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, or you're actually looking to improve or install sophisticated building management systems. Then I would say the next step is exploring the electrification and on-site renewables, so how you can shift away from fossil fuels like natural gas, or actually and install solar panels and explore battery storage opportunities for your building. The next step, which really depends on the energy demand of an organization, is procuring off-site renewable, actually enter into power purchase agreements, so-called projects. And this is really depends on, I would say, the national regulations, because where it may be there's strict regulations from the government or there's like any obstacles, then you probably need to consider the renewable energy certificates. The next step, I would say, is monitor, verify, and optimize. So continuously drive and track performance. Verify your savings, identify how you can have an ongoing improvement by implement the digital sustainability. So this is where I would say the technology, the smart metering, sub-metering, the Internet of Things can actually contribute and leveraging from the building management systems data analytics, where dashboards can actually combine your data with the efficiency, the identified efficiency measures, and understand which of them have the higher impact on consumption, on reduction of emissions. And the last step is actually, addressing really the embodied carbon of the building by specifying your, considering the carbon footprint of materials and construction in major refurbishments or new buildings. And that is by specifying your technical building requirements, by optimizing structure design to minimize carbon impact, and of course conduct life cycle analysis.
Okay, thank you. That feels like a clear path. We'll talk in a moment about any potential pitfalls
Yes.
and so on. Pippa, any thoughts around this at the moment? Or?
I always feel quite pained about. Mary's absolutely right. These are the steps, these are the guidance that is given, and actually it's one of the issues, is that it is made to look very simple. It's as easy as 1 to 8. If we do all these steps, we will have achieved our goal. It's not that simple. It really is not that simple. I don't think it's easy to, and Mary will speak much more about this, but, to assume that we've got that building A is the same as building B, that even doing an audit is an easy thing to do. What do you include, what do you not include? And so I think moving into how tricky it is, these anodyne pathways are all very well and good, but actually the fact that they're made to look so simple is the thing perhaps that gets in the way of actually achieving it.
And do you think that creates an issue around the expectation management of embarking on this kind of process, where a building owner is expecting a panacea, where in fact this isn't going to solve all the problems at all?
Mary will talk to this much more. My view is absolutely. I mean, when somebody thinks something's simple and then they're told it's not, it doesn't go down terribly well.
Yeah.
Mary?
Well, I would say that managing expectations is really challenging because it's often, full decarbonization of a building involves, I would say, extensive cost, and it's really special, like for older buildings, that it's not only replacing your heating system, for example, you need to intervene on the building envelope. So some significant reduction can be achieved through most of the steps that I mentioned, by even purchasing power purchase agreements, or by actually electrifying your building. But still, I would say that it's challenging in terms of how this can be actually a win-win situation for everyone, for the tenant, for the landlord. So in terms of expectation management, I would say that clear communication is critical here, because this is a journey, often faced throughout overall several years, maybe even different capital investment cycles. So I would say it's not an overnight fix, and that's something that the goal is continuous improvement, so that at least you have a very defined pathway towards the net zero of the organization, and you actually monitor and you are actually implement actions based on that. And of course, it's not, as I say, the complexity here is how the different roles contribute to that, because it's usually the interest of the landlords, the tenants, the organizational goals here. So who owns what in terms of who is doing, more significant upgrades, more light touch upgrades, I would say, and how the building is managed in terms of how then the facilities management supports, maintain, monitor, and implement, lower cost measures to avoid wasted energy. With the tenants, how they actually, their nature of activities, how they interact with the technology, of course. All of these, they actually play a critical role, or with sustainability leads and energy managers, that they actually coordinate, the overall strategy, the risks, they track progress, they report to leadership. And I would say that clear understanding from all sides and strong leadership commitment from top, I think this is essential for driving this process effectively.
Yeah. And with any process of this nature, it is part investigation. So it's very difficult to have an expectation of a definitive outcome before you even start to understand the nature of the problem for a specific building.
Exactly.
And for me, it's also the fact that people consider this to be a linear process. But it's absolutely not. Buildings are living things. The building is built, or the building is managed. The tenants change, priorities change. And, as you move through the timescale, it's very nice to assume that you can have this sort of fixed program. But we all know what happens in budget cycles. And having that oversight of long-term programs is really difficult. Our construction cycles, we tend to construct something, we tend to have a project, we have temporary project teams who come together to deliver it. But actually, we need to start thinking about these recycling refurbishments over a much longer period of time.
I suppose to take an example from recent history, if you'd embarked on this process with a portfolio of buildings in 2019, and you'd set out knowing what the buildings were used for, knowing how they behaved, knowing what energy costs were roughly, and then COVID happens, life changes completely for everybody.
Patterns.
In the short term, the medium term, and the long term, all of a sudden, all of those plans, those expectations are out of the window. So to your point, Pippa, it has to be a dynamic and it has to be an evolving piece. And I suppose in terms of the downsides of the approach, the differences between buildings come into this. A difficulty standardising, I suppose, is the problem.
I would say, the building heterogeneity is massive. It's definitely not one size fits all solution. You cannot really compare 1960s, I would say, concrete office block with a glass tower, with, completely different construction systems, and expect, or, and using the same process, or even, the historic buildings. There are key differences between them. I would say that, the age, the construction, all the challenges that we have with the older buildings, with poor insulation, that we need to intervene to the building envelope rather than just the energy systems. And this can be disruptive and costly, right? Or even with the historic preservation requirements can be another barrier. I would say the building type and the use. So if we compare a dense call center with high occupancy operating 24/7, with a standard office with flexible working, they will have completely different profile. Or imagine to compare, a standard office with an office with significant lab equipment that they specialize then spatial cooling, that requires special cooling equipment. So all of that is, there are like elements that should be considered. The nature of activities dictates, I would say, the energy demand patterns and the types of interventions that will be effective in that place. And we also have, climate zones. Different countries require more cooling, different countries more heating, or the ownership and the lease periods, the way that, the lease is structured, can also pose challenges. I would say, secondly, it's so difficult to standardize beyond just, what I mentioned is you can follow the same steps, right? You measure, you audit, and you identify opportunities and you implement opportunities. However, the specific actions and the cost and benefits can vary hugely from building to building. So in one building, maybe that I would say effective, and then in another building, it might be technically infeasible and economically inviolable. So that makes very challenging, when you're looking not just one building, portfolio based standardization on the process. And of course, the third, I would say, another element is the human element.
That old variable.
Very critical, I would say. And often underestimated, I would also say, because building performance is not about only the technology, it's about how people interact with it. And it's the occupant behavior. I would say that they can significantly impact on the energy consumption and engineering savings. I think also the facilities management expertise, optimizing and maintaining complex systems, but in this case, training is required, or sufficient sources in order to actually implement the measures properly. And any lack of it can lead to performance drift, I would say here, and also the decision making buy-in. Because even what is optimized, what do you prioritize? A short project and return on investment, or over longer term measures and the asset value protection. So I would say the cost and disruption factor, they are critical to how the buildings actually are upgraded currently and will be upgraded. So retrofits can be expensive, and this can be a major barrier for organizations actually and landlords to decide and actually take the actions ahead. So a typical path, I would say, and framework is a useful guide. However, successful decarbonisation and implementation requires a nuanced, flexible approach tailored to buildings, I would say, in specific context, considering building characteristics, usage patterns, ownership structure, and of course the people involved.
And all of that within what Pippa was talking about earlier on about the commercial, the business strategy around what are we trying to get from this, how long are we doing it for, how many budget cycles does it cover,
Exactly.
and so on.
Exactly.
There's a really interesting parallel there that occurs to me as we're talking. So Pippa, when you and I, in a previous episode, we talked with Ankit Singh about materials passports and circular reuse of materials and so on. And with Mary talking about how a facilities team needs to understand an individual building, not a one-size-fits-all piece, I'm beginning to think we need building passports here that provide us with some form of structure for how to manage the living thing.
Passports and systems are important. But, that human element of actually keeping people on track, actually thinking about future flexibility, actually making sure that the building facilities management systems are actually working. There are so many decisions, if you have a lot of microinverters from PV cells, how do you decide when you're going to replace? Is it just one if it's gone out, or is it you wait for 6 to go out because it's more efficient? And so all of these different things play off against each other. So I'm not sure that a sort of a physical passport, but one that actually does document the changes, I think is important.
Thanks, Pippa. So, Mary, then, how do we compare one building with another?
Well, I would say that that's really important question, because effective decarbonisation, and especially across a portfolio, relies on meaningful, I would say, accurate comparison and established methodologies rather than tailored approaches that you may build just to facilitate a comparison between one building with another in a specific place, in a specific location. And it's tricky because precisely because buildings are so diverse. So I would say we often start with the energy use intensity as a measure that we typically measure the kilowatt hour per square meter per year. And this normalizes the energy consumption by floor area, allowing a basic comparison of operational efficiency. Similarly, we calculate the carbon intensity, so the kilogram of CO2 emissions equivalent per square meter per year, by applying the appropriate carbon emissions for the energy sources used within the building. I would say that there are few tools and methodologies that allow you to put to input energy data, building characteristics such as the size, the operating hours, the climate zone occupancy, and benchmark your building against a large portfolio a large database actually of similar buildings. And that just provides a score or a rating that indicates the relative performance. However, these existing approaches, I would say, and tools and standards have limitations when you need more granular comparisons of, or you're looking across different activities within the offices, within the commercial activity, and different types of commercial activity. So factors not be considered, and to me they're critical, is the specific sector focus. For example, while the tools, they will adjust for, I would say, factors like operating hours and working hours, they may not capture the energy demands of, for example, a call center that operates 24/7, as we said, versus a law firm office. even if they're within the same building category. So a standard office energy intensity benchmarking may not be relevant at all for a building with significant data center space or lab facilities. That can be completely different as a profile. Also, as we mentioned, like the climate and grid differences. So you're comparing a building in a cold climate, which relies on gas heating heavily, with one on a hot or mild climate, which is mainly using grid electricity. And that requires for me careful consideration, because here again, we may have similar energy usage intensity. However, the carbon intensity could differ vastly, because in one case, we actually have like the fossil fuel emissions, while in the other case, the grid may depends on, I would say, a relative clean fuel, or there will be integration of renewable sources in the grid. So that will make, the comparison, I mean, without considering these facts, the comparison is not accurate, actually. And then, with data quality and granularity, accurate comparisons demands, reliable data, right? And consistency. So in these cases, submetering, for example, is something that can isolate, the tenants from communal areas of the building, rather than just consider the whole base building consumption. But this is not always available. Therefore, we really need to move beyond the operational intensity and energy, I would say, the energy intensity. And instead of, with the standard benchmarks, right, they primarily focus on the energy and carbon intensity. They don't typically account for the broader building characteristics and broader environmental, social, economic factors, environmental legislation. And I would say, of course, the net zero goals of organizations, right? Because every organization will actually have their own strategy, their own goals. So comparing buildings holistically requires looking far beyond just energy and carbon intensity.
So I can see this kind of, there are several different ways that this can, you can take this. One is to, can we develop a way of accurately comparing buildings? And do we have a metric that we can do that with? One is, do we have buildings where some are particularly good for call centres and some are particularly good for offices? And do we have a way of informing people who manage those portfolios where they should be letting the building and how that goes? Or do we talk about actually who manages that carbon, who has responsibility for that measuring? Is it the tenant? Is it the landlord? How does that work?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's quite an interesting one to look at, perhaps not here, but...
Well, you could potentially take it further and say, well, actually, all data centres as net generators of heat should be located in cold climates.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That would be the case, but
it's a bit of a sweeping
there is
generalisation.
demand not being only located in cold climates. That's the issue. That's what needs to be addressed, really, how they can be operated efficiently, not only in cold climates.
I mean, the other thing we probably don't have time to talk about is, the balance between Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions.
Yeah.
And saying that, in fact, with all of this, the Scope 1 and 2 emissions are probably less than 35% of the total emissions. And so really looking at where that sits within Scope 3, and is it sort of upstream and downstream energy use? And do we even have a way of measuring that? I mean, that's a whole new pathway.
Yeah, definitely. And I think something that could keep Mary and her research busy for many years to come,
in
trying to pin this down.
Absolutely not.
As well as several more episodes of this podcast, I think.
Of course.
So, Mary, do you want to break down for us how socio-technical issues and individuals factor into this.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say they're fundamental. We often rely heavily on the technical aspects, with the energy systems within the building, but achieving, I would say, lasting decarbonisation should also involve the socio part, definitely, which involves people, the organization, the culture, and how people interact with the technology. So we can think of a building as a socio-technical system comprising from interconnecting subsystems, such as technology. First one, technology. So the physical, the physical building fabric, the HVAC systems, or lighting controls, the software that is used, meters, renewables installations. This is where I would say engineers and FM teams they mainly focus. Then second, we have people, and that involves occupants that with their behaviors, the comfort expectations, awareness, and their motivation directly affect the energy usage. So are they engaged in efficiency initiatives, or they are, I would say, resistant to change, or ignorant of the organizational policies? Then we have the management, the facilities managers, their skills, expertise, the workload, and access to information. So all of that, they will determine how well the building is actually performed. Do they understand the complex controls? Do they plan preventative maintenance? All these are critical. Decision makers, so landlords, asset managers, the leadership teams who approves budgets or set or approve strategies, I would say. So their priorities, the risk appetite, and understanding of sustainability as importance as complexity influence investment decisions, I would say. Then the third one is tasks. So the processes, the workflows, they are all related to the managing of the building, the energy monitoring, the maintenance schedules, the responding to, the comfort complaints, the implementation of efficiency measures, the reporting performance. Are these processes efficient and aligned with the organizational goals? And then the fourth one, I would say, the organizational culture and of course the structure. So the policy, the company policies, the strategy, the communication channels, the incentive structures, how the leadership commitment and overall, I would say, organization, interest and culture towards sustainability. So does the organization prioritize sustainability actually? Is there clear responsibility and accountability? Are FM teams, empowered? Is there effective communication between the landlords, the FMs, the tenants? It's this kind of the subsystems that all of them working together will bring completely different outcome, and also they contribute and affect differently the operation of the building.
And it's one thing to look at it at any point in time,
Yeah.
but actually then to Pippa's earlier point, thinking about the continuum of or the evolution in the use of a building or a portfolio of buildings, then that brings a whole other layer of complexity to it as we go on.
Indeed.
But I think a lot of this also depends on who's it worthwhile for. I think the sort of the focus on sustainability, having sustainable culture, these are things that we're all familiar with. But it's really bridging that gap between the ideal of being sustainable to what's it actually worth, and how do we measure it, and how do we want to make that happen. So, you can install the most sophisticated and advanced building automation system, but if the FM team isn't trained to use it, if the occupants keep overriding settings, it's just not going to work.
Yeah.
So, but how do we make people want to do that?
Yeah, and I would also add on this that, you may have like very well-structured and ambitious decarbonisation target and plan, but as long as there's no interest from, I would say, from the leadership, this will not, or the budget it will not be allocated, they won't be actually translated into an action. So there are different, I would say, parameters here, or with the occupants. Let's say, in the absence of technology, the occupants can really affect with their behavior the way that the energy is used for lighting, with the controls, for small power use, and is also what else can really impact, the building operation is with this performance gap, with, buildings actually use more energy in reality than designed, and that maybe is often attributed to commissioning, to hand over the control strategy and occupants' behavior. All of this actually highlights, I would say, the breakdowns in the socio-technical system. And I would say that, to a successful decarbonisation strategy must integrate socio-technical considerations, being user-centric design systems, with continuous training on the building sustainable operation, with clear roles and responsibilities, with feedback and communication, with incentives and policies from the organization and stakeholder engagement. Because treating building decarbonisation as purely an engineering problem misses half the picture here. It's about optimizing the entire system. It's the technology, the people, it's processes and organization working together.
And it's a much more nuanced conversation that we need to have really around every transaction,
Yes.
around the real estate piece. Thank you both. That's been fascinating. Mary, just to bring this to a close, how do you want to sort of close off the thoughts we've been having today?
Well, my last words would be that, decarbonising the commercial building, it's I would say it's a complex challenge, but each of us can contribute, by developing methodologies, established methodologies, by developing tools, by developing technologies, and of course with our expertise, applying our expertise. So I would say at least that's my plan, and we can absolutely tackle it if and only if we can actually prioritize, make it that a collective priority, as we mentioned, for everyone involved.
Absolutely, here. And I think a good note to end on is that this works best when everybody's pulling in the same direction. So,
Exactly.
fantastic. So thank you both. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope anybody who's listened to the episode found it useful and interesting. I certainly did. As ever, please do subscribe for more episodes available in the usual places, including Spotify and YouTube. Thank you.